The voicemail lasted 47 seconds. Ned Hargrove had listened to it 19 times. He knew this because his ancient flip phone, the kind his daughter-in-law Sandra kept calling embarrassing, kept a counter. 19 plays. 19 times he'd pressed the cracked speaker against his ear in the parking lot of Valley Ridge Medical Center, standing beside his truck in the November cold, with his breath coming out in little clouds and his heart doing something it hadn't done in years. Breaking! His grandson Tyler's voice, small and frightened and recorded in what sounded like a tin can. Dad, they said you're not coming back. Grandpa Ned's sick and they said maybe he won't be here for Christmas. Dad, I don't want Grandpa to go. He's the only one who still calls me buddy. Then silence, then the shuffle of small feet on a concrete floor, then the unmistakable creak of a shed door swinging shut. Ned was 67 years old, built like a man who had spent 4 decades doing things that required a strong back and a stubborn jaw, which he had. He'd framed houses in Michigan winters. He'd pulled a tractor engine by himself on a Tuesday afternoon just because no one thought he could. He'd watched his wife Margaret go into the ground 11 years ago without making a sound at the graveside, because she'd told him specifically in the last week of her life, "Ned, don't you dare ugly cry at my funeral. You'll embarrass both of us." He had cried in the truck afterward, alone, for 2 hours. He was that kind of man, the kind who felt everything enormously and showed almost none of it. But Tyler, his son Daniel's youngest, 8 years old with a gap between his front teeth and Margaret's same serious brown eyes, Tyler had always been able to reach him in places nobody else could find. The shed belonged to Sandra's property, the small house out on Route 9 where Daniel and Sandra had been living for the past 3 years. Tyler apparently liked to sneak in there to be alone sometimes. Ned had known this for a while. He'd never said anything about it. Every kid needed a place. What he hadn't known was that Tyler had been in there the night before last, hiding with Daniel's old cell phone, the one Sandra kept in a kitchen drawer for emergencies, listening through the thin walls as Sandra talked to her sister on the phone about Ned's diagnosis. Pancreatic, stage 2, but catching it at 2 was already a kind of miracle, the oncologist had said. Treatment was possible. Outcomes were improving every year. But Sandra had been talking the way people talk when they think children are asleep. The way they talk when they forget that sheds have walls, but not insulation. Ned drove to Daniel's house that Saturday morning without calling ahead. He pulled his truck up the gravel drive and sat there for a moment, looking at the place. The plastic Halloween skeleton was still on the front door. Daniel kept meaning to take it down. The yard had that scattered look of a family living too fast, a bicycle on its side, a rake leaned against the porch that had been leaned there so long it had started to look like architecture. Ned loved this yard. He loved every imperfect inch of it. He got out of the truck. Sandra met him at the door before he even knocked, which meant she'd seen him pull up. She was a tall woman with sharp cheekbones and a permanently brisk manner that had taken Ned a few years to understand wasn't coldness, it was armor. They understood each other better now. He suspected she'd been crying recently. Her eyes had that particular flatness. "Ned," she said. Sandra, he held up the paper bag in his hand, brought donuts, the kind with the sprinkles. "I need to talk to Tyler." She studied him for a long moment, then she stepped back and let him in. Tyler was at the kitchen table eating cereal and watching something on a tablet, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big that had probably once belonged to Daniel. When Ned walked in, the boy looked up, and something complicated moved across his face, relief and guilt, and the particular devastated love that children carry for old people they are afraid of losing. "Hey, buddy," Ned said. Tyler's chin started to wobble. "Hey, Grandpa Ned." Ned set the donuts on the table. He pulled out the chair across from his grandson, moving carefully because his back had been giving him grief, though he'd never admit that to anyone, and he sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You heard some things," Ned said. Tyler nodded. His spoon circled the bowl without purpose. You were in the shed. Another nod. Your dad's old phone. I just wanted to call him, Tyler said, and his voice cracked on the last word in the way that made Ned's chest go tight. He's in Denver for work, and I just wanted to tell him something, and I heard Mom on the phone, and she was saying. He stopped. His eyes were very bright. She said you were really sick. I am sick, Ned said. Tyler blinked. He'd clearly expected some reassuring denial, the adult machinery of everything's fine cranking into gear. The honesty surprised him into stillness. But sick doesn't mean gone, Ned continued. You know what they found? They found it early. You know what that means, catching something early. Tyler shook his head. Means you've got time. Means the doctors can do something about it. Ned reached across the table and tapped the back of his grandson's hand with 2 fingers, his version of a tender gesture, the closest he usually got. I've got a plan, buddy. Doctors, treatments, the whole circus. I'm not going anywhere quiet. But what if? Tyler, Ned's voice was low and even. Look at me. The boy looked at him. I have seen a lot of things in 67 years. I built your daddy's first bike with my own hands. I was there the night you were born, and you came out screaming like you were already mad about something, which I respected. A faint smile moved across his face. I have not survived all of that to miss Christmas. Something in Tyler's face shifted, not fully releasing, but beginning to. You promise, the boy whispered. Ned was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who made promises he couldn't guarantee. He'd learned that lesson early, and it had cost him something to learn it. He believed in honesty with children more than comfort. But he also believed, down in some place below the fear and the diagnosis and the 19 voicemail plays, that he was going to fight this thing with everything he had. Not for himself, particularly. For the gap-toothed kid with Margaret's eyes, who hid in sheds and called him on old phones because he didn't want to be alone with his fear. I promise I will fight like hell, Ned said. That's the best promise I've got, and I think it's worth something. Tyler stared at him, then he got up from his chair, walked around the table, and put his arms around Ned's neck the way he used to when he was much smaller. Ned sat very still for a moment. This was not usually how he operated, and then he put one large hand on the back of the boy's head and held on. You're still going to put up the Christmas lights with me, Tyler said into his shoulder. The ones on the gutters that you always do. Every single one, Ned said. He started treatment the following Wednesday. It was brutal in the way those things are brutal. The nausea, the fatigue, the indignity of a body fighting itself. There were days when Ned sat in the infusion chair and stared at the wall and did the only math that mattered. How many Christmases do I want, and what am I willing to do to get them? The answer was always the same. As many as I can, everything. Daniel flew back from Denver and didn't go back for a month. Sandra brought food every Sunday, the real kind, heavy casseroles and dense bread that Ned appreciated more than he ever said out loud. And Tyler called every night on the house phone, actually called, dialed the number, waited through the rings, because Ned still didn't have a smartphone and Tyler had decided that was perfectly fine. They talked about nothing important, sports scores, a kid at school named Marcus who was annoying but also funny, the exact right technique for hanging Christmas lights on gutters without falling off a ladder, a topic on which Ned had strong and detailed opinions. 47 seconds. That's how long it had taken for a scared boy in a shed to crack open something in Ned Hargrove that he hadn't even known was sealed. He was glad it had. On December 23rd, with his energy low but his stubbornness operating at full capacity, Ned climbed his ladder carefully, with Daniel standing at the base holding it and pretending he wasn't worried, and hung every light on those gutters himself. Tyler stood in the yard below, watching, his breath coming out in small clouds in the December cold. Looking good, Grandpa Ned, he called up. Ned looked down at him from the ladder, at the gap-toothed grin, at Margaret's serious eyes, lit up now. Hand me that last strand, buddy. and Tyler ran to get it.